right. Okay, today we pick up the Gospel of Mark, but just a real reminder, through the most of the summer, we had a sermon series on the life of David. If you're interested in getting some information about that or listening to some of those sermons, you can go to our YouTube channel, and all those sermons are on there. You can find them if you want to go back. But now we pay our attention to Mark. Again, during tumultuous times, we come to find sure footing underneath us as the earth seems to be shaking. But a word of context, where we come from. Real quickly, the Gospel of Mark, written by a guy named John Mark, a companion of Peter. And it is the first gospel of the earliest stories, the earliest narratives of Jesus. And he begins not with a narrative of Jesus' birth. He begins with Jesus being baptized by a relative named John. You call him John the Baptist, maybe a cousin of Jesus's. And then it feeds 4,000. So apparently, feeding, food, hungry people are really important to Jesus, right? He goes out of his way to make sure that people have enough to eat and they have the right food to live on. And so we get this story. And we'll get there in a second. But it's also important because right before this story is the story of Jesus' friend John being murdered. He is executed by a pseudo-king named Herod Antipas. He is beheaded. And then Mark goes right into the story of the feeding of the 5,000. There is no segue. There's no words about how Jesus would have felt about this, how would have thought about this. There's simply nothing. Now, if you go to the Gospel of Matthew, there's a couple little sentences about this in the same story, but Mark gives you nothing. And that is very typical to John Mark. If you go all the way to the story of the resurrection, all you have at the end of John Mark's gospel is a tomb that is empty, and he asks you to fill in the details and answer the question, what do you think happened? Right? So in a very similar way, we get to the story of the feeding of the 5,000, but right before that, his good friend is murdered. And John Mark is going to say to you, I want you, when you read sacred text, to slow down enough to put yourself into the story and ask yourself, and so I encourage you, when you're reading the Bible, just don't plow through all the words. Go slowly and think about how you would have responded in the midst of all of this. How would have you felt if you were Jesus and all of a sudden you were pressed into action? That's the whole point of John Mark and his literary techniques, is wanting you to fill in the details. So now, with that context, let's read the story. So we're in the Gospel of John Mark, and we're in the 6th chapter. Read this. The apostles gathered around Jesus, reported to him all that they had done and taught. And then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he says to them, Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place, and let's just get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on from the other towns and got there ahead of them. But when Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them, taught them many things. But by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him and said, This is a remote place. Actually, the translation, this is a desert. This is a wilderness. It's already very late, they said. So send these people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and the villages and buy themselves something to eat. Jesus turns the table. And this is not a translator's flair here. This is right in the text. Chloros kortos, green grass. So when the disciples see desert and wilderness, he sees green grass. When the disciples see scarcity and helping as a non-starter, Jesus sees opportunity and possibility. Let's remember that. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Now, that's a weird detail, right? Imagine there's a whole bunch of people, we'll get to that in just a second, a whole bunch of people, they've been listening to this guy for all day long, and it's 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and by this time in our modern day English, they just hangry, right? And well, I don't know about you, but when I get hangry, I get really chaotic. And so what does Jesus do? Let's get to some order for this mess. When I get out of sorts, chaos ensues, and that is never, ever God's intent. It is always about order and green grass. So, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls. What we're talking about is 5,000 men, right? John Mark is really intentional about this. However, most of the time in the Greek language, when you're talking about something like this, this is a reference for the community gathered. This is a metaphor. It's not saying that this was just gender specific. This is just how they talked. And so if you add up all the women and children, what we're talking about here is somewhere around the order of 15 to 18,000 people. And there was everybody's belly full, and there were leftovers. Now, an amazing story, and some things that we need to really think about. And I think we need to really concentrate on Jesus' 3 little lines that he has. That's all he's got 3 little lines of this whole story, right? Let's get away to a solitary place and rest. Right? You give them something to eat. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. Right? So let's take a look at each of these. I think they're important for us. As the earth is shaking underneath their feet, here's the foundational lessons. Number 1, let's get away and get some rest. Now again, this comes right on the heels of the story about the death of John the Baptist. And Jesus knows that it's incredibly important. There are times in our lives that we need to get away and get some rest and some food. He has just heard about the death of his friend. For us, it may be grief, it may be sadness, it may be anxiety about what's happening, to get away and get some rest. And that is why we call this thing Shabbat, Sabbath, rest. We get away to this quiet place and we just rest together to be nourished and to be fed. Right? And so I encourage you to be thinking about those things that you're experiencing in your own life. And again, it may not be sadness for the death of the friend, but it may be all sorts of different things that Jesus is saying, you need to take time to take care of yourself. This is a spiritual discipline that Jesus is teaching his friends. And it's a spiritual discipline that I think you and I need to learn about. Is the importance of getting away, creating some space to process what's happening in our life. It's all too easy to keep moving forward so I don't have to face those things that I don't want to face. But Jesus is saying it's incredibly important to do that because stress and anxiety and sadness and grief will take a massive toll on your bodies if you don't process it. Did you know you use up 20% of your calories every day just simply in your brain, and that's not processing death and anxiety and stress. That's just on a normal day. Jesus is telling us it's important to get away and to take time to process. And a lot of times, I don't know about you, but that starts with food, right? Get some food, get some friends, get some rest. Well, somebody says, I just want to spend some time, and they spend like 45 minutes just telling you everybody's story. And just that reality that just comes crashing in your neighborhood, right? And that's just the real world. So Jesus tells his friends, let's go to the other side, let's go to a solitary place, it's good to get some rest. So people follow him, and they want his attention again, and they want his lunch, they want him to do something. Right? That's just reality. I wish I could tell you that when you just went out to get the rest, you'll never get that phone call. But you and I both know you will. All right. Now, how do I deal with that? That's tough. The Bible says that Jesus saw them, it's a large crowd, and he had compassion on them. I love Greek. Greek's a cool language. The word there is splagnon. I love that. It just sounds good. We're going to use that more often. It means your bowels. Use that in a conversation today. How would we translate that in English? I just felt it in my gut. Right? He saw these people. And something just welled up inside right here. Interesting, back in the Hebrew times, you did not make a decision up here. They understood decision making to happen right here in your guts. Something moved him. The Father spoke, and he had compassion. Now, the English translation of compassion also means to suffer with. So he makes a decision. Now, again, but there are some times when reality will come, and it will knock on your door, your phone will ring, you'll get the text, and you'll need to be able to move to that, to transition to that. So Jesus does. But it's interesting, he's moved by his guts. Something happened within him that welled up. This was not guilt or shame pressuring him into doing something. There is a difference between compassion moving us and guilt and shame driving us. I can't tell you exactly where that is. I know I've made a lot of mistakes on that one. But somewhere there is that to be found. And the only way I can tell you to do that is to anticipate the phone call, to anticipate the text, so you can be already praying in the midst of all of that. And so you can make a decision whether or not how God is moving you to move with compassion, and you can find it in your guts to do something about it. But again, the disciples are saying, let's look at the economy of this thing. We don't have anywhere near enough money to pull this thing off. And they're also looking at the geography of this place. They see a desert. There's no way we can do this. And Jesus says, well, you feed them. Find a way. And that's how we move. We transition to that. And then he says, okay, what's in your pocket? What do you have already? Respond, and when they begin to respond, other people decide to see what's in their pocket, and they also then respond. So sometimes when things need to happen, yes, God can intervene. Sometimes when things to happen, you can intervene. And sometimes when things need to happen, others and your neighbors can intervene. And all of those simultaneously and equally are miraculous. And Mark will ask you how you're going to define the miracle here. Again, there is no Shazamming here that Jesus is portraying. All of a sudden, people begin to respond. 15,000 bellies are filled, and there's enough for leftovers. And so this is the story, not just of the miraculous bread, but this is a story about miraculous generosity that creates mutuality so that no one is left behind and no one ever leaves hungry. And so Mark is inviting you to fill in the details about how you think the miracle happened. So again, in closing, I know the world is shaking underneath our feet. I know we all watch the news and try to figure out what in the world's going to happen next. And we're all worried and concerned about our faith. He writes to a community called Ephesus. They are surrounded by the anxieties and fears of the culture that is bombarding them, actually making them question whether or not Jesus really was God at all, much less whether he rose from the dead. And they were persecuting the small band of Christians in Ephesus. And he said, some of you are teachers. Some of you have all these occupations of healers and faith, all these gifts. You can change your community at Ephesus just by what you have already. I want to remind you how amazing you are. But as you do that, always find time to rest and some food and friends. Because our world is hungry. And they will come knocking on your door by the thousands, wanting what you have. And what you have is the good news of Jesus. And by the power of the Spirit, you will be the miracle that the world is desperate for. Let's pray. God, we come here to rest just for a little bit, to be renewed. And we're going to have bread and wine, not fish, but we'll have bread and wine. And we'll be fed. And because of your Spirit moving us to generosity, there will be leftovers so that we can go and feed the world. May we find rest. May we find food. May we find friends. May we find and create space to process our lives so that we can find the
Hello,
sure
friends. My name is Roger,
the only
and I
Son
serve
of
as
God.
the pastor here at St. Gregory's. Thanks for taking the time to watch our recent video. We hope that you found something meaningful in our message today. If you're intrigued about what's going on here at St. Gregory's, click subscribe. You can keep up with all the content that we're posting up on our YouTube channel. You can also visit our website at saintgregs.org, S-A-I-N-T, gregs.org. You can find out all about our life here in our community. Throughout the week, we have lots of different studies and community groups as we explore the way of Jesus together. We invite you to leave a comment. We'd love to know how you're exploring your faith journey as well. Thanks for all the way that you share in our life here at St. Gregory's. Look forward to visiting with you again soon.